Good morning. May I start with congratulating you with a very interesting event and thank you for inviting me to participate in this event. If you hear this as a recording, unfortunately, I'm waiting in the queue for my flight. Let me start this story about developing EOSC with a dream. Suppose I would plug into Google the word Delft University of Technology because I want to know more about the Delft University of Technology, hit the return button. I would get something like 36 million hits and TU Delft on top. Or if I would like to know more about the Friedrich Schiller Universität in Jena, I could plug that in and find out the address and the location immediately. And the next thing I could do is find the directions. Now, on the other hand, if I'm looking for a data file related to the drying of gelatin, work I've been doing some 30 years ago as a researcher, I can plug in, of course, a data set on the drying of gelatin into Google again, and I will find interesting articles like the one on top or also on the third place from Nature. If I open up that article and I look into it, I find very beautiful pictures about the drying of gelatin as a function of temperature, as a function of, let's say, gel strength, concentration of gelatin in this particular case. But I do not find the data sets. I do not find the metadata with the data sets, and I cannot really use this unless I start reading it off and do some guessing. Wouldn't it be great if we all could find relevant data sets for our work as easy through a web or FAIR data as we can find many things through adequate search engines now on the web? Why can we not find these? Well, simple, they are usually not there. Less than 2% of the research results is out there. And secondly, if they are there, they seldomly are as fair as possible or containing the metadata needed. This fits within the context, this development of the open science. In the Netherlands, we define this as towards open access, towards fair data, and embedding citizen science into the whole development. Basically, this is going from science as is to science as will be. There's a number of, let's say, boundary conditions or conditions to be met in order to do this. We need to adopt our recognition and reward system. We need to develop support and training for this, especially for the data work. We need an engagement of the community involved. We need the necessary e-infrastructures. And of course, having the right policies and regulations in place will help. This is what we call open science. And in order to get this going, engagement, coordination, and support is needed. Towards fair data is in line with the developing of the European Open Science Cloud. I've used the abbreviation FAIR already, and I don't have to explain to you, seeing that you just gave a prize for the most fair data set, what FAIR is. But I would like to emphasize a few things about findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable principles. First of all, that we would like to try for publicly funded research to get the overlap between what we call fair data and open data as big as possible. But FAIR isn't equal to open, and FAIR ensures that data can be found, understood, and reused, also by machines. Data can be shared under restrictions, also fair data, and still be fair. Thus, the summary of this is as open as possible, as restricted as necessary. If you look at the grand vision of Europe with respect to the what I call EOSC ecosystem, we can see that the aim is to reduce fragmentation in the existing research infrastructure to enable interdisciplinary research to address social challenges, to support open science and contribute to the digital single market, to offer EU researchers the digital resources they need in order to practice open science, and to stimulate the emergence of a competitive cloud sector. Give thus Europe a global lead in the research data management. And an important part of that is the development of what we call the web of fair data. And if I say data, I mean data including publications and software. So every time I use the word data, think data, software, and publications. This is the part which we call EOSC and the part that is going to be developed with the help of the EOSC Association I will talk about. What is it? Well, Ursula von der Leyen in her Davos lecture last year called it a web of scientific insight. We call it a web of fair data and related services on these data. The aim is to make a federation of relevant, existing and future data sources, thus creating a virtual space where science producers and science consumers can come together. An open-ended range of content and services, open-ended as the World Wide Web, of course meeting the European data requirements, and yes, in interaction with the rest of the world, because it would be not very useful only to have this interaction in Europe. I tend to see EOSC as a data infrastructure, being a twin sister or twin brother, if you want to, of the European e-infrastructure organizations, in what I call a yin-yang situation. The e-infrastructure organizations offer the store, compute and connect services, and the data infrastructure has to offer the interoperability, the servicing of the data, and everything that that goes with it. The combination of those two form the EOSC system, which we are talking about, the EOSC ecosystem. But to make this distinction is helpful in order not to forget that e-infrastructures without data are not very relevant if there's only zeros or ones in there. But on the other hand, data without e-infrastructures are nothing of value either. You can put them on paper, you can put them in your head, but it doesn't help you very much in making progress. What are the guiding principles for what we call the European Open Science Cloud? I say we call the European Open Science Cloud, and I usually use the abbreviation EOSC because it's neither European in the end, it is not for open science, but for fair data, and it is not a cloud, definitely not. It is a federated system. The overarching principle for this is that it is done for the research we do. And yes, there will be data spaces for other sectors and other domains, but the EOSC is specifically there for the science and for the research. And thus, the research has to be in the center. Some people say the researchers have to be in the center. Yes, their work has to be in the center, and thus they will be in the center. But this is not for the researchers as individuals. This is for the work the researchers do. It is multi-stakeholderism, meaning as well research performing, research funding, and service providing organizations need to support this. Otherwise, it will not succeed if we don't do it with all of us. It is about openness, as I said, as open as possible, as restricted as necessary. And this is what we will do by the FAIR data we're going to put in there, based, as I said, on the FAIR principles. And research artifacts need thus to be as much as possible. And as the development is at that stage, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable with the principles underlying it, and especially having the right metadata with it. It's a federation of infrastructures, as I said. EOSC will federate existing and upcoming data and e-infrastructures. And it is all about machine actionability. Datasets are too large, datasets are very distributed and should be very distributed. So EOSC has to strike the balance between machine and people in delivering the services that will serve the need of the scientists in Europe. A little bit of history. The partnership started with, or the governance, I should say, of EOSC started in 2019, 2020 with a system of 2 expert groups introduced by the European Commission that set up the governance for the future. This governance for the future, which is existing at this moment, was created in the middle of 2020 by the start of what is the EOSC Association, an AISBL, Association Internationale Sans But Lucratif. And now this association has signed an MOU with the Commission to create a co-programmed EOSC partnership. This is since the middle of last year. Thus, the association is pushing this development of EOSC, and I can tell you this is an exciting journey. What are the milestones so far? As I said, we have founded the association with 4 members. These 4 members do not have any extra rights, they're just the founding members. It was incorporated in the middle of 2020. It obtained a royal degree in September of that year. It had its first General Assembly, where I was elected president and where we elected a board at the end of 2020. And in the meantime, we've had 3 more General Assemblies, the last one being in May of this year. As I said, the combination of research performing, research funding, and service providing organization is basically the core of this development. And if we look, we now have more than 160 members and more than 70 observers, roughly with a ratio of 72, 8, and 30% of the research performing, the research funding, and the service providing organization. A ratio which is also in line with the, let's say, number of research performing, service providing, and research funding organization we will find. As I said, we have signed a co-program partnership with the European Commission in the middle of last year when the Horizon Europe program started. And thus, joining the association means basically joining the partnership and the development of EOSC. The co-programmed partnership, what does it mean? Well, it means that the mission of the association, in order to provide a single voice of advocacy and represent a broader stakeholder community, can be met because the stakeholders can be a member of the association. It means that the association is to promote the alignment of the European Union research policy and the priorities and activities, and will coordinate this through what is called a SRIA, Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda. I will come back to that. And ultimately, in the long run, this is to enable seamless access to data through interoperable services and to address the entire research data lifecycle, from discovery to storage, management, analysis, and reuse across borders and scientific disciplines. This is a huge endeavor, and therefore I call this the dream, but in the long run, this is what we want to reach. As I said, we signed an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, with the Commission, and what is in this MOU? The MOU is established between the 2 partners, the Commission and the Association, where the Association represents, through its constituent entities, its members and observers, the stakeholders of this process. It's a contractual agreement, although not legally binding. The scope and the objectives are that the expected financial and in-kind commitments by the partners are met. The European Commission has committed 419 million euro over the period of Horizon Europe, and we have committed 500 million euro in kind over the same period, no, not over the same period, over the period of the partnership, which ends at the end of 2030. In order to meet the KPIs, by following the KPIs, we can see how much we meet these requirements. The governance is done by a partnership board that has representatives of both partners. And in the partnership board, we invite what is called the EOSC steering board that has representatives from all the member states and the associated countries. The rules of procedure for the partnership board have been drafted and have been based on a draft by the Commission and agreed on. And as I said, this duration will be until the end of 2030. The activities and commitments is such that the Commission will take into account the input and advice from the partners, other than union, basically the stakeholders, thus the association, when identifying and defining calls for topics in our activities in the work program. And this is what the Commission is doing, listening to the association with respect to what topics should be addressed in the next call in Horizon Europe. It will contribute through the work programs of the Commission and the programs made in the different countries. The activities and commitments of the partners other than the Union, again, the association, is to provide input and advice to the Commission, as was mentioned above, to give in-kind contributions, as I said, as well with respect to contributions to the Horizon Europe actions or the projects the Commission sets, as with respect to the additional activities being paid by the countries or institutions themselves, and to invest in these operational activities. It's based on openness, transparency, dissemination, and the coordination is done by the 2 partners. The monitoring and reporting has to be done by the association. We have set up and implemented an effective reporting and monitoring system, and we have created or defined jointly a list of key performance indicators. How do we do this work? For that, we have set up 5 advisory groups, and within these 5 advisory groups, 13 task forces. The first advisory group on the implementation of EOSC has 3 task forces, one on the rules of participation and the compliance monitoring for these rules of participation, one on PID policies and the implementation, one on researcher engagement and adoption. And Suzanne Dumichel is the board member that forms the liaison with these task forces. Then the task forces in the advisory group technical challenges on EOSC, and these 3 are technical interoperability of data and services, infrastructure for quality research software, and the AAI architecture. And Ignacio Blanquer is the liaison person from the board for these task forces. Then we have 2 task forces on metadata and data quality, the semantic interoperability and the fair metrics and data quality task force. And here Sarah Jones is the liaison person from the board. And the 4th advisory group is on research careers and curricula. Data stewards, curricula, and career paths is the first task force in there. Research careers and recognition and credits is the second in there, and upskilling countries to engage in EOSC. So what is the stage of development in the country in order to join the EOSC development? And then the last 2 task forces are within the sustaining EOSC advisory group. Here Bob Jones is the liaison person. By the way, Willem Rietmark was the one for research careers and curricula. And the 2 task forces in sustaining EOSC are defining funding models for EOSC and long-term data preservation. What are the implementation steps in order to get there? Well, EOSC is to be an interoperability framework, and the interoperability framework is premised on the FAIR principles. Currently, we are defining a minimum metadata model and the crosswalks in order to easily discover over the existing federated research data and metadata. Not done, but this is the aim. We need a clear, publicly driven definitions for all these concepts, for the metadata, the data schemes, and the challenge so far is that not all communities apply standards. So convincing communities that they should apply standards is another implementation step for EOSC. We need repositories of semantic artifacts and mapping across these. We aim for all metadata and measurements to be machine readable, as I have said before, machine actionable, I should actually say, not only readable. And what is needed in the development of all this, that also the local compute capacity is able to handle requests. If we keep the data more often where they are, rather than putting them into a big data pile, it will be needed to handle the requests coming into those data repositories. Thus, summing up the tasks for the EOSC Association are the development and governing of a federating core in order to create this federation, managing or having managed the AAI, the authorization and authentication infrastructure, managing the PID policies, the compliance network, and the trust certification of repositories and other service providers. We do that by, next to that, of course, we do outreach to stakeholders. We have to monitor the services and the transactions, manage the EOSC trademark, and contribute, of course, because money comes from the Horizon Europe program, we have to contribute to the Horizon Europe policy. What are the major challenges in developing this? Well, there's 2 categories. The technical challenges, they are to create in the long run a truly based multidisciplinary interoperability. We do have interoperability to some extent within some disciplines, and I'm talking about data interoperability. I'm not talking about computer interoperability, but we by far do not have a broad base for multidisciplinary interoperability. And for the short term, this means we need an optimal authentication and authorization infrastructure. A stepwise growing of the interoperability is by expanding from disciplines to neighboring disciplines and to domains, and ultimately to the broad multidisciplinary domain. More challenging are the social challenges. Getting the noses in the same direction is not an obvious thing, and having had all these projects in Europe over the years did not really help to, per definition, move in the same direction. So our aim is to focus the existing projects and the new projects, and to focus the activities of the countries and from the research infrastructures in one direction, a direction described in the SCRIA. So overall, combining the local, regional initiatives, and by region I mean, for example, Europe or the United States, towards a true open science commons, as I would call it, with the global convergence on standards to support the implementation, is the ultimate social challenge for the long run. I said I would say a little bit more about the SCRIA, and part of the SCRIA is the multi-annual roadmap, or MAR. The SCRIA defines the general framework for future research and development and innovation actions in relation to EOSC. And the multi-annual roadmap sets out of these the priority activities and the outcomes for the implementation of these levels, at 3 levels: the European level, the national level, and the institutional level. We developed the MAR in 3 phases in time. One has been developed in the past for the period 2021-2022. This was the initial developments for starting the Federation of Infrastructures. Then we're talking about the next 2 periods, 2023-2024, for which we're now working on the MAR, and I'll say a few words about that in a minute. This is the expansion towards a minimum viable EOSC, MVE, that generates added value. And then in the last phase of Horizon Europe, either 2025 separately or 2025, 2026, and 2027 combined, we call that the phase of creating impact for EOSC, for practicing open science. What is the structure of the MAR? Well, we have structured it according to the 3 main objectives in the SCRIA, and the sentences describing these objectives are quite a bit longer than this, but this is the short version. Make open science the new normal, adopt standards and tools, and establish a sustainable and federated infrastructure. Priorities have been grouped according to 3 levels, as I said: European, national, institutional level, and the outcomes are listed as a whole under each of the objectives. And then we offer some clarification text explaining the wider context of the key points. We did a consultation on the draft MAR we had made with the board and with the task forces in March 2022, consulted the larger stakeholders in Europe, and they raised the following themes based on the draft MAR we sent them. They asked us to say more on the added value proposition. So what is this all good for? And therefore I have in my talk included this dream. I will come back to this dream in a minute. They find the terminology confusing: the core, the exchange, the onboarding, the federation, the resources, etc. So we have to make more clear what we mean by that. They want to extend the text in the direction of multilingualism. Several concerns have been raised about how this all will be funded, and this is a concern that is there all the time. Yes, this is an issue, and we have and are working on that. We have to place more emphasis on the national investments and the member state role. We will do so with pleasure, because we would like to see the national input and the national role to be strong in this. The funding models, well, same story as how to fund it. They see it as a priority, the responders, in order to get this going. Then there is a question about the role of research software engineers versus data stewards and how we will fund them. Funding is an issue, of course, of the institutions and of the countries mainly. And if we use the word data steward, we also mean research software engineers, and we should maybe mention them separately now and then. Minor points to check on the implementation approach with respect to the AAI, the PIDs, and the interoperability framework were raised in this consultation. Based on that and revising the document, which we are now discussing with the European Commission, we came up with the following priorities, and these are overall priorities with a lot of sub-lines in them for the period 2023-2024. Technically, we want to create the EOSC core and the onboarding procedures for this federated structure. Therefore, the interoperability and the data search have to be, let's say, growing, more interoperability, more data to be searched. And an important item that was mentioned is data quality. I'll come back to that in a second. Then the involvement of the member states and the engagement of those, the funding and the resourcing models is a form of involvement. And the most important involvement is how do we get the skills and how do we see to it that the work in this direction is well recognized and rewarded where needed. These are involvement issues rather than technical issues. Quality I mentioned is a topic we have chosen. The objective here is to explore what are the most relevant quality dimensions considered in the different communities, different disciplines if you want to, and how can they be incorporated in EOSC. The measures are, of course, dependent on the context and defined by the research communities as part of the possible approach. They are quality attributes and dimensions like accuracy, completeness, conformity. They vary across disciplines and are closely related to the research subject they are intended to measure. And to identify common measures and align them with the FAIR principles would be a step forward in, let's say, serving quality of research data. Don't forget, EOSC as a structure doesn't guarantee quality of the research data. Quality of the research data have to be guaranteed by the researchers in the first place and the institutions these research come from as the second level. But of course, we would like to help them in, let's say, identifying what we mean and what is meant by quality. Another example of future attention is the access to unstructured and non-standard data. The objective here is to see to it that the lack of structure and heterogeneity in the case of non-standardized data, for example, data where there's no previously defined data model or that are not organized in a predefined way, like social media streams, that these data, for often innovative, can be reused and may be accessible. A possible approach could be here to structure such data, making them accessible using artificial intelligence. And then in order to do that, it would be good to have artificial intelligence facilities as an integral part of the life cycle of research data. So it needs to be managed and made accessible in the same way as the data and the scientific publications themselves. Including concepts for an implementation of knowledge graphs in EOSC is an option here. With links to data, software, publications, and other entities. For example, authors is another way of approaching this. If we look at EOSC in a wider context, some people talk about the 9 data spaces that are being developed as hybrid, public, and private. And then there's, of course, the national and the private thing. Then EOSC is not a standalone thing like it is in this data lake. No. According to the European Commission, and these are slides taken from the European Commission, EOSC is a cross-cutting data space for research and innovation for all the domains that are going to be covered by the data spaces that are being created. The health data space is furthest in the development, but the intention is to have data spaces in the industrial and manufacturing domain, agricultural domain, mobility domain, energy domain, etc. So EOSC is the basis for a science, research and innovation data space that will bring together the data resulting for research and development programs and will be connected and articulated with the sectoral data spaces. This is according to the formulation of the European Commission, and this means a great deal to us, especially a great deal of work. Then EOSC on a global stage. Service providers from third countries can already participate in EOSC, but they have to, of course, adhere to the rules of participation and the applicable legislation here in Europe. And EOSC will work together with other regional initiatives towards common goals for open science in the world, driving a global convergence on standards. CODATA, GoFair, RDA, ICSU, these are all organizations we are discussing with in the different regions. We have contacts in Asia, in the United States, in Canada, in Australia, etc. Coming back to my dream. In 2040, I hope, and this is my dream, that 50% of the relevant research data, again, data, publications, and software, would be as fair as possible. Then my dream would come true. As fair as possible means as fair as possible at that moment in time. And if my dream would come true, don't forget it has to be worldwide. So this is not a dream only for the European Open Science Cloud, this is a dream to interact and to make standards and to make interoperability possible in a broad sense, a web of fair data, as I said. In other words, when I will be able to find with a few clicks the diffusion coefficient of water as a function of temperature and water concentration for the compositions of gelatin I'm interested in, then I will be able to predict the drying behavior of this material under different conditions at different scales in different setups of drying equipment using a computer program I have developed in that time. I maybe should say would have been able. Thus, this would save a whole lot of time in developing and lots of energy in the application. Don't forget, at that time, and I don't know the figure for today, 15% of the world's energy was used in drying behavior. So developing faster and developing more accurate would have saved a lot of time and a lot of energy. And that would then be thanks to EOSC in that case. So let's co-create EOSC. Thank you for your attention.